Thanks for tuning in. Let's take a look at the ideas of assignment 2.2. So in this video, we'll be exploring the definitions of ecosystem and habitat and the major types of species interactions. Ecosystem is both the biotic and abiotic factors in an area and how they interact. So for example, Monteverde's cloud forest ecosystem in Costa Rica consists of the community plus the air, water, soil, nutrients, and energy the community's organisms use. All those things factor in. Habitat is the environment in which an organism lives. So ecosystem is the broadest term, and habitat is sections of that ecosystem where organisms live. And so here we see a juxtaposition of a natural habitat next to a artificial habitat, human generated habitat. So this is the habitat for these ducks. It would be this urban pond or lake. Ecological niche involves the habitat and the role that a species plays in an ecosystem. So for example, the ecological niche of a sunflower growing in a yard includes its roles of A, absorbing light, water, and nutrients for photosynthesis, B, providing shelter and food for other organisms such as bees and ants, etc., and C, giving off oxygen into the atmosphere. So it's not just about where the plant lives, that would be its habitat, but it's about how it interacts with the other elements of the ecosystem in that habitat. And those other elements could be not only biotic factors like bees and ants, but abiotic factors like light, and water, and nutrients. And species sometimes compete to fill a niche. So for example, if the mustard plant is better suited to fill the sunflower's niche, it can outcompete the sunflower, forcing the sunflower into a smaller realized niche. So here we see a mustard plant, which has basically taken over a whole section of land. And we actually are seeing this right now in Santa Barbara. If you drive through areas, especially in the foothills, you will see hillsides covered with flowering mustard right now. And it's basically that mustard has outcompeted other plants because it is better suited to filling that niche. So in other words, it is more effective at using the sunlight in that area. It's more effective at maybe taking in or getting pollinated by pollinators, things like that. So competition limits species from filling their fundamental niche. They will only fill a partial realized niche. If you have basically on the left here, let's take a look at fundamental niche. This is kind of abstract here. Resources along this axis, resource 2 along the vertical axis. Species 1 fulfills all its roles or uses all the resources it can. This would be without any competition from other species. And it's able to, by resource 1, okay, let's get more specific with this. So let's say that resource 1 is moisture, soil moisture. This is something that all plants need. And plants also need sunlight. So let's say that that's resource 2 up here. So species 1, if it has no competition, it might be able to use a certain range of sunlight, going from full-on sun that we might see here, full sun, to partial sun down here. And in terms of soil moisture, let's convert to another color here. Okay, let's see here, in color. We'll do that in blue. All right, soil moisture. So let's say it can go all the way down from being relatively dry to relatively moist. So it's able to be pretty happy within this general range of conditions. But you bring in 2 other species that are competing in that same habitat. Now you can have a situation where species 1 gets boxed out. It's limited in its roles or uses only, and uses only a subset of the resources. So because species 2 might be better at using low sunlight over here, species 1 might get pushed into the areas that have more sunlight. Or because species 3 might might really thrive in areas of high moisture, it's going to end up boxing out the plants that may have been able to tolerate the higher moisture of species 1. The species 1 here is going to get confined to be using a smaller range. So I'm going to try to go back to red here. So now species 1 is getting boxed into a smaller range of sunlight, this range here, and a smaller range of moisture. Because species 2 and species 3 are better at thriving under those other conditions. Okay, this is an example where it has a smaller realized niche than what it had over here without competition. And by a smaller niche, that's going to result in a smaller population size for that species. So resource partitioning can maximize a species' realized niche. And let's take a look at some examples of this here. We see a tree. So they're sharing the same habitat, but they're each kind of finding their niche within that habitat. So tree climbing bird species might respond to competition for food by changing where they look. These are all tree climbing birds. Some look for smaller insects. So let's take this one here. The brown creeper climbs upward along the trunk looking for tiny insects. It might be able to eat the bigger insects, but those bigger insects are being eaten up by the bigger birds. So it has to settle for the smaller ones. It now has a smaller realized niche. Some drill holes to find insects. And so we see the sapsucker drilling holes for insects. Some climb upward, like this white-breasted nuthatch climbs downward along the trunk looking for insects. And some climb upward. I got that wrong here. The upward one is the woodpecker. It's climbing upward and it's able to go into the deeper areas. If this woodpecker wasn't present as a species, then this brown creeper might be able to go right in there and grab some of those insects, which would give it a bigger fundamental niche. But because of the presence of the woodpecker, it settles for a smaller realized niche by only eating some of the smaller insects, not the big ones found deep in the holes. So this idea of resource partitioning is the resource in this case are the insects. The partitioning is that they kind of split up what kind of insects they're going for so that each of them can try to maximize their population size. So how about in auto mechanics niches? Let's just make a little comparison here. You got your general mechanical shop. That's a place where you can take your car and they can pretty much fix anything on that car. And so they have a very large niche. And you might say that they are generalists. But then you have these other companies or shops like Jiffy Lube, who are specialists because they specialize in doing oil changes and other small things. So they have a smaller fundamental niche, but because that specialist can come in and serve some of the roles in the community of doing oil changes at a cheaper price, that's going to force the larger general mechanical shops to have a smaller realized niche than their fundamental niche, because now they're not going to be doing as much of the oil changes and stuff like that. So that's a comparison, if you want to draw an analogy with it. Jiffy Lube stores are like the specialists in the ecological world of mechanical automobile maintenance. And the general shops like Firestone, they are the generalists who do it all. Several types of species interactions can occur in a community. And there's some vocabulary, you just got to know it. And we'll talk in class a little bit about ways of remembering this. Mutualism, they both benefit. Commensalism, one benefits, the other one doesn't care, not affected. Predation, parasitism, herbivory, this is where one species benefits, the other one is being harmed. Mutualism is where they're living close to each other, but they're basically not interacting. Commensalism, where one isn't really getting any benefit, but the other one's being harmed by it. and competition, where they're both having a negative effect on each other, kind of driving each other out. These all occur when you have species interacting. And so let's take a look at some of those interactions. Predation. This is exploitative, meaning it's harmful to the victim. I wouldn't want to be that frog. It involves the hunting, capturing, killing, and consuming of prey by a predator. And we have different ways that species defend themselves from predation. You can have coloration, in this case camouflage. You can have warning coloration saying, hey, I'm poisonous, don't eat me. Or you can have mimicry, fools the predators by making an animal look like something else. Here a caterpillar mimicking a snake. Parasitism is also exploitative. So in this case we see these lampreys which are sucked onto the fish. And so this is good for the parasite, but not good for the host. Herbivory is also exploitative because you see the plant is clearly being harmed. You can see portions of its tissue being taken out, and now that tissue can't do photosynthesis to provide energy for the plant. But the caterpillar is clearly benefiting. And mutualism is non-exploitative. Both species benefit. So if you think about mutual, things that are mutual means it goes both ways. If you have a mutual understanding with somebody, you both understand things the same way. So you get in a fight with somebody, but then you come to a mutual understanding of why the other one did what they did. That would be kind of a back and forth equal experience or equal understanding. So here you have mutualism, non-exploitative. Both species benefit. The hummingbird gets food. The flower gets pollination. So its seeds, its pollen, can go off to other plants. I shouldn't say its seeds. Technically, its sperm can go off to other plants to fertilize those plants. Some interactions are harder to identify. So, for example, commensalism is where one species benefits while the other is unaffected. So, example, a large tree giving shade to smaller plant species. Is a tree really unaffected by giving shade to those smaller plant species? Perhaps the smaller species are stealing soil nutrients. Hard to tell. Commensalism is where one species is harmed while the other is unaffected. Example, a plant species secreting a chemical that is poisonous to neighboring plant species. Those neighboring plant species are harmed because they can no longer grow in the soil, and the plant producing that chemical might be unaffected. But then you could argue that maybe it takes energy for the plant to produce that toxic chemical, so in a way it is being harmed by having to defend itself. Not clearly easy to identify. Okay, we'll talk more about these concepts tomorrow in class.